I'm Scottish and live in Scotland, and this happened a few years back in the Highlands. A friend and I decided we'd go camping for the weekend somewhere remote, far away from the noise and people. We settled on a spot way up north, near the ruins of an old stone castle that overlooked a quiet loch. It was a beautiful place, remote and completely still. The kind of place where the air feels heavier and the silence has its own sound. The ruins sat right by the water, and we pitched our tent not far from the crumbling tower. We arrived in the late afternoon, the air crisp and the light lingering the way it does in the Highlands during summer. For a while, it was perfect. Calm wind coming off the loch, that eerie stillness only found this far north. We were looking forward to a relaxing night by the fire. But then the midges came. Anyone who's camped up there knows what I'm talking about. They're like tiny flying devils, mosquito-sized, but worse. You can't escape them. They swarm your face, crawl into your ears, get under your clothes. We tried to hide in the tent, but within minutes, it felt like being trapped in a jar full of them. After an hour of scratching and cursing, we looked at each other and decided it wasn't worth it. By about 11 p.m., we were throwing everything back into the car. We didn't even bother packing properly. We just wanted to get out. We figured we'd drive back home that night, about 4 hours south. The drive started fine. The Highlands at night are pitch black, but the roads up there are single track, and with no other traffic, it's peaceful in its own way. Once you leave the loch, you're surrounded by open moorland and rocky hills. No trees, no houses, no lights for miles. Just darkness, and the occasional glint of the loch in the headlights. About half an hour into the drive, I was just zoning out, focusing on the narrow road ahead, when I caught something out of the corner of my eye. At first I thought it was a shadow, but it looked like something was moving alongside the car. I glanced again, and my stomach just dropped. It looked like a massive black dog, easily the size of a small horse, keeping pace with us on the verge. Its back came level with the bottom edge of the car window. I'm not exaggerating. The thing was huge. We don't have wolves in Scotland. No bears, no big predators at all. Definitely no dogs that size wandering the Highlands in the middle of the night. For a few seconds, I tried to rationalize it. I told myself it must be a shadow, or that I was just tired. It was late, the road was narrow, and maybe I was just seeing things. I didn't mention it to my mate beside me because I didn't want to sound mental. About a minute later, he turned to me, pale as anything, and said, "Did you just see that giant dog next to the car?" I felt my blood run cold. I said, "You saw it too?" He nodded and described it exactly how I'd seen it. Long, black fur, thin but muscular, walking upright like it had some weight in its shoulders. The only difference was that he said it had glowing red eyes. I hadn't seen that. I only caught its outline, but the way he said it made my skin crawl. We both tried to laugh it off, telling ourselves it was just a deer or some trick of the light, but we couldn't shake it. I suddenly remembered something my gran had told me when I was younger, about the giant black dog of Scottish folklore. It's supposed to be an omen of death, seen by people just before tragedy strikes. The thought made me feel sick. We kept driving, both of us on edge, checking the mirrors every few seconds. There was nothing behind us, nothing ahead, just the dark road stretching forever. Then, out of nowhere, a set of headlights appeared behind us. They came up fast, but what was weird was that we hadn't seen them appear from a distance. With how open the landscape was, we should have seen the glow long before they got that close. It was like they'd just blinked into existence. As the vehicle got closer, we realized it was an old, beat-up van. Rust all over, blacked out windows, number plate either covered or unreadable. The kind of vehicle you'd expect in a crime documentary, not the middle of the Highlands at midnight. We assumed it would overtake us, but it didn't. It just stayed behind, matching our speed perfectly. For nearly half an hour, it followed so close we could barely see its headlights in the mirrors. At one point, we pulled over slightly to let it pass, but it just slowed down with us. It didn't try to overtake. It didn't flash its lights. Nothing. Then suddenly it did. The van swung out, overtook us, and pulled right in front, then immediately slowed down to a crawl. And then, without warning, it turned off its headlights. Instant darkness. We were still moving, but now the only thing in front of us was the silhouette of this van, completely black, blocking the beams of our headlights. My mate swore under his breath, and I honestly thought, this is it. This is what the dog was warning us about. We couldn't see where the road ended or what was ahead. After a few seconds of pure panic, the van suddenly veered off onto a dirt track and disappeared into the darkness. We didn't stop to think. I floored it, and we drove well over the limit until we reached the next town. We pulled into a car park beside the police station and just sat there, not talking for a while. We both ended up falling asleep in the car until morning. Even now, neither of us can explain it. We don't know what we saw. Maybe it was a coincidence, maybe not. But every time I think about that night, I get the same feeling I had when I saw that black shape moving alongside us. Like something was watching, following, waiting for us to notice. And honestly, I still don't know which part scared me more, the massive black dog that shouldn't exist, or the van that definitely did. A good friend of mine told me this story years ago. He's the stereotypical old big bad trucker. The kind of guy who's been driving since before I was born, smokes like a chimney, and doesn't scare easy. I've seen some weird stuff with him while driving in South Texas, along the border. A good friend of mine told me this story years ago. He's the stereotypical old big bad trucker. The kind of guy who's been driving since before I was born, smokes like a chimney, and doesn't scare easy. I've seen some weird stuff with him while driving in South Texas along the border. He never batted an eye. But while telling me this story, he had goosebumps and this distant look on his face. From this guy, that was about the equivalent of a trembling lip and shit-stained pants. I'll tell this story in the first person, as he told it to me. Years ago, sometime in the late 90s, I was heading out from home in Central Texas, making my way down to Laredo to pick up a load. It was early morning, somewhere around 4 or 5. I'd had a few days off, so I wasn't tired at all. Just me, the road, and the low hum of the diesel. It was one of those narrow 2-lane highways that cut through the middle of nowhere. No houses, no towns, no lights. Just fence line, brush, and the occasional road sign half swallowed by rust. The only sound was the engine and the tires on asphalt. I came around a slow bend when I caught sight of something at the edge of my high beams, a dark shape on the shoulder. I figured it was roadkill, happens all the time out there. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't just a dead deer. There was something crouched over it. I eased off the throttle, not sure what I was seeing. At first I thought maybe some hunter had stopped to cut off the antlers, but then I saw the thing's arm move. It reached into the deer's belly and pulled something out. That's when it hit me that this person, or whatever it was eating the deer. I could see the wet glint of meat in its hands, and I swear I saw it bring a handful up toward its mouth. Right then, it stopped and turned its head toward me. Not toward the headlights, not toward the sound of the truck. Straight at me. It stood up. Whatever it was tall. Its head and shoulders were still visible above the hood of my truck as I came up on it, and this was an old needle-nosed Pete with a high front end. It was huge, covered in dark brown hair, not like fur. Longer, uneven, like a shaggy coat. Broad shoulders, arms hanging low, chest like a barrel. The part that stuck with me were the eyes. They weren't glowing, but they caught the light somehow, and they were fixed on me the entire time. There was awareness in that stare. It wasn't animal curiosity. It was something else. something that understood what I was and where I was sitting. I didn't even think about stopping. My foot went down hard. As I passed, its face turned, tracking me through the driver's side window, and I swear I could still see it looking down at me as the truck roared by. I must have held my breath for half a mile. After that, I just drove. My hands were locked on the wheel, and my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. I didn't look in the mirrors, didn't slow down, just kept the truck pointed south and told myself over and over that it was a trick of the light, a bear, a shadow, anything. It took about 20 minutes before I could breathe normally again. When I finally hit the next junction, I pulled over on the shoulder and stepped out for some air. The night was dead silent. I smoked half a pack before I got back in and drove the rest of the way to Laredo. When I got there at sunrise, I still couldn't shake it. I told a few guys at the yard what I saw, but they laughed, said I must have been seeing things after a few days off. But I know what I saw. A week later, I had to take the same route again. I didn't want to, but that's the job. It was around the same time of night when I hit that stretch of road. I slowed down without even meaning to. The deer was gone, no blood, no sign of anything, just empty pavement and a long line of fence posts. But as I passed that spot, I couldn't help feeling it again, that weight in the air like I was being watched. The hair on my arms stood straight up, and I found myself gripping the wheel tighter until my knuckles hurt. Nothing happened. I didn't see anything this time. But even now, whenever I'm driving a lonely stretch before dawn, I think about that thing, the way it stood there, calm and upright, like it wasn't afraid of anything on this earth. That's it. I don't know what it was. I just know it was real, and I hope to God I never see it again. My dad worked the night shift at a 24-hour gas station back in the 1970s, rural southeast US, middle of nowhere, on a long, lonely stretch of highway. It was one of those places that stayed lit like a lighthouse for truckers, because there wasn't another open station for 40-50 miles either direction. They had a big gravel lot where rigs could park for a nap or grab a sandwich at the little diner booths inside. CB and landline was it. No cell phones, no cameras, no panic buttons. If something went bad, you picked up the receiver and hoped someone answered. He was alone most nights, from 11 to 7. No security, no weapon, just a counter, a cash drawer, and a view of the pumps through plate glass. He used to pass the time stacking cigarettes, wiping the coffee burner, counting the till twice, and chatting with whoever wandered in. You got to know the regulars. Long-haul drivers would roll in at 2 a.m., buy coffee that tasted like roofing tar, and swap road gossip. One night, a guy came in who set every alarm in my dad's gut buzzing. He was wiry, jittery, tight jacket zipped up to his chin, even though it was summer and the air outside still held the day's heat. Tight pants, something long and heavy riding under the jacket at his waist. Kept drifting up and down the aisles, looking at canned beans and motor oil while sneaking little glances over at the counter. Dad felt the hairs on his arms prick. He said it wasn't one thing you could point to and say, that's it, it was all of it together. There happened to be one trucker in the store he sort of knew, not a friend, but the kind of regular who'd nod and shoot the breeze. Dad waited until the guy set his coffee down and said, "Mind sticking around for a minute? That one's giving me a bad feeling." The trucker looked past him, took in the jacket, the way the guy's hands hovered near his waist, and said, "Yeah, I can do that." He leaned his hip against a stool and made himself part of the furniture. Sketchy guy kept pacing, picked up a map, put it back, palmed a pack of gum, then set it down. At one point, he stared at my dad for a count that ran too long, eyes flat, like he was deciding something. Then he blew out a breath, walked outside, got into a blue car, and tore out of the lot. Dad watched the taillights shrink and felt the tight band around his chest ease. Trucker stayed for a bit anyway. They talked about nothing. Weather, road work up past the county line. After a while, a couple more fellows came in and slid into the lunch counter booths to split a sandwich. The regular stuck around another 10 minutes, then nodded and said he was going to catch an hour in the sleeper. Dad thanked him and went back to counting change he had already counted. Time moved the way it does on night shift. Coffee burned down and got remade. Bugs tapped the glass and fell. Trucks came through, hissed to a stop, filled, rumbled off. The clock walked toward 3. Dad told himself he'd overreacted. It was late. People look off at that hour. He had work to do, and the drawer balanced, and nothing bad had happened. Then hell hit the lot. A car came in way too fast, dust boiling behind it, and braked hard enough to make the sign out front shudder. A man jumped out before the engine stopped and sprinted for the door, eyes wide and hands shaking. He yelled that he needed a phone. Dad pointed at the landline behind the counter, and the guy leaned over it, stabbing 911 with a finger that didn't seem to know where it was going. He told the dispatcher he'd just pulled into a gas station 40 miles back, the next closest place on that stretch, and found the attendant on the floor, shot, no pulse, register open. No one else around, no CB, no payphone he could see, and he didn't know the area. The only thing he had was a detail he couldn't shake. As he'd pulled into that other station, a blue car had blasted out of the lot, no headlights, plate covered or missing. Dad said the words "blue car" made his mouth go dry. The dispatcher kept the caller on the line. She took the location as best as he could describe it, mile markers and the name painted on a faded sign, and said units were already en route. She asked if there were any injuries at the caller's current location. Dad shook his head, and the guy repeated it into the receiver. She told him to stay put, provide his information, and wait for deputies to arrive. When he hung up, the room went very quiet. The truckers in the booth stared at their plates. Dad felt every beat of his heart in his hands. He looked out at the highway and saw nothing but his own reflection in the glass and the dim glow of the pumps. Deputies showed up fast for the middle of nowhere. They took statements. They asked about the man in the jacket, what time he'd been there, what he looked like, what he touched. Dad described him and the car. Before sunrise, the parking lot was full of long haulers who had pulled in and killed their lights to wait. Word moves fast out there, even without a CB. Men leaned on bumpers and spoke in low voices. Someone brewed a fresh pot and passed styrofoam cups around. The regular from earlier came in rubbing sleep out of his eyes and asked my dad if he was all right. Dad nodded and told him thanks again for sticking around. The regular just shrugged like it wasn't worth mentioning. By mid-morning, they had the guy. Couple counties over, same car, same jacket, on drugs, on paper, already in and out for robberies. Someone spotted the blue car at a diner and called it in. Deputies rolled him up without a fight. My dad went in to give a formal statement and later to sit behind glass and nod yes when they asked if this was the man he'd seen. He said the jacket was gone, the eyes weren't. They charged him with armed robbery and murder. Dad didn't make himself a hero when he told it. He said he got lucky that the regular stayed. He said the blue car leaving before anything happened at his store was the break of a lifetime. He said a landline you can reach without asking is worth more than it looks like, and a lot full of truckers is better than a locked door. He worked that job a while longer and then moved on. He still remembers the thud of that car stopping and the way the caller's voice scraped raw on the word dead. He remembers the jacket in summer heat and the shape under it. To the long haul who hung around with my dad that night, thanks. Wherever you are, I hope the coffee's hot and the miles are easy. And to anyone who thinks nothing happens on empty highways at 3 a.m., it does. Sometimes the only difference between a story you tell and a story someone else tells about you is who stayed until the bad feeling left. I'd driven about 5 hours that day to a family gathering, one of those reunions where you barely recognize anyone, and everyone wants to remind you how much weight you've gained or lost. I had my 5-year-old son with me, but my husband couldn't come because of work. It was fine though. It felt good to see everyone after 20 years, even if most of them were just polite strangers at this point. The weirdest part of the night was when my aunt, she's this old hippie type, always drunk or stoned or both, came up to me and said, "I see an owl on your shoulder protecting you." I laughed it off and told her I'd see her again in another 20 years, hopefully when she'd laid off the bong. But it stuck with me for some reason. When the event was over, I started the long drive home. It was around 2 a.m., middle of nowhere, barely any streetlights, and my son had fallen asleep in the back seat. You know that feeling when your eyes start to close on their own, like little danger naps sneaking up on you? That's what was happening. I decided to pull into a rest stop before I did something stupid. It wasn't a nice highway rest area either, just a small dirt lot with a couple of old picnic tables and a flickering light by the bathroom building, completely silent except for the sound of the wind moving through the trees. I figured I'd get out, stretch my legs, have a quick smoke, and wake up a bit before driving again. I stepped out and closed the door quietly so I wouldn't wake my son. When I turned around, there it was, a big white barn owl, standing about a meter from the car, staring straight at me. It didn't move or blink, just stood there, like it had been waiting for me to get out. Its feathers looked almost silver in the dim light, and for a second I thought maybe it was injured or something. But no, it just kept staring. I lit my cigarette and tried not to think too much of it. Maybe it was used to cars stopping around here. I lit my cigarette and tried not to think too much of it. Maybe it was used to cars stopping around here. Maybe it hunted mice in the lot. I remember thinking about what my aunt said earlier, about an owl protecting me, and I actually laughed a bit at the coincidence. When I finished the smoke, I got back into the car and locked the doors. My kid was still sleeping peacefully, and I thought maybe I'd rest my eyes for 20 or 30 minutes. Better safe than sorry, right? I tilted the seat back, closed my eyes, and tried to relax. When I woke up, it was because of this loud banging noise. It sounded like metal getting hit hard, followed by a scratching sound that made my stomach drop. I sat up and looked around, trying to figure out where it was coming from. Then I saw it. The owl was on the hood of my car. It was flapping its wings, slamming itself against the metal, and clawing at the windshield like it was trying to get inside. It looked furious, its wings spreading wide enough to cover half the glass. The sound was horrible. Sharp, heavy thuds and the screeching of talons dragging against the paint. I didn't know what to do. I just sat there frozen, staring at this bird that seemed completely out of its mind. I thought maybe the headlights had scared it, or maybe it saw its reflection and was attacking it. But then I noticed something else. Out of the corner of my eye, through the driver's side window, there was a shadow. I turned, and there was a man standing right outside my door. He was just there, looking in at me. I didn't even hear him walk up. He was holding a cigarette, staring straight through the glass, like he'd been there for a while. My whole body went cold. I don't remember thinking clearly. My hands just moved on their own. I hit the lock button, made sure every door was shut tight, and turned the key. The car roared to life and the owl flew off, but the man didn't move. He just stood there, cigarette in his hand, watching me. Then he started walking toward the front of the car. I shifted into reverse, my hands shaking so bad I almost dropped the gear. He suddenly lunged at the door handle, yanking it hard and pounding on the window with his fist. I could see his face now. No emotion, just this blank stare. I slammed the accelerator, tires spinning on the dirt, and shot backward out of the parking spot. He kept chasing after the car for a few steps before disappearing into the darkness behind me. I didn't stop. I drove until I hit the main road, probably going way over the limit. My heart was racing so hard I thought I might pass out. I didn't even look in the mirrors. I just kept going. After a few minutes, I started shaking so badly I had to pull over again, this time at a gas station that actually had lights and cameras. I sat there for a while and finally called the police. They sent someone out, but when they went to check the rest stop, there was no sign of anyone. No footprints, no car, nothing. The officer tried to be nice about it, but I could tell he thought I was either dreaming or exaggerating. Maybe I was. Maybe I was just overtired and freaked myself out. But I know what I saw. That man was real. And that owl. I don't know. I still think about it sometimes. Because if I hadn't pulled over, if I hadn't woken up when I did, or if the owl hadn't started going crazy on the hood, he could have opened the door before I ever noticed him standing there. People always joke about guardian angels showing up in strange forms, but now every time I see an owl, I get this chill down my spine. It's like a reminder. Something was waiting for me out there in the dark that night, and something else made sure I drove away before it reached me. One night, my wife and I hit the end of our rope with bedtime. Our 3-year-old wouldn't settle. Our 1-year-old took his cues from his brother and ramped up any time the house got quiet. We ran through every trick that used to work. Singing, a warm bottle, the fan on low, white noise on my phone. Nothing helped, and somehow each thing made the other kid angry. We were already sharp with each other, because there is a point where the fatigue makes every suggestion sound like a criticism. I said we should do a drive since motion used to knock our older one out, and my wife said yes fast because at least the car would give us a small space that felt different from the rooms where nothing worked. We packed in a hurry, diaper bag with wipes, one extra onesie, a sippy cup that always leaks a little, but not so much you remember to replace it. My wife buckled them while I grabbed keys and 2 light blankets. It was warm, but the AC sometimes takes a minute, and sleepy kids like the wait. We didn't even talk about where to go. The route was automatic. Take the quiet county highway to the interstate. Go 10 or 12 miles west. Turn around and come back. The loop has just enough straight road and just enough hum in the tires to smooth their breathing. That county road always feels darker than it should. It runs through the suburbs of New York City, yet there are long gaps with no streetlights at all. You pass a strip of offices that close by 6, then a stretch of wetlands with nothing but low fencing and a sound that could be wind or water, depending on the night. We merged from the local road, and I brought it up to about 50. The middle lane was clear. The right shoulder sometimes hides a dead deer, and I would rather have space on either side if something jumps. We had barely settled in when I saw a shape in the headlights. My brain searched for the answer that fits most nights out there, which is a deer or a bag that caught air, and it did not land on either. I said there's something in the road, and by the time my wife sat forward, we were already past it. It was a person. He had crossed the fast lane and stepped into a line that would have met our bumper if we had been 10 feet slower. If there had been other cars, I think my body would have processed it as part of the usual highway chaos. A bad decision that will end in yelling or sirens. That stretch was empty, no taillights ahead, no headlights behind. It looked like the entire road belonged to us and to the one person who chose that exact second to step across it. The emptiness is what made my stomach drop, because he could have crossed 10 seconds earlier with no risk. Or 10 seconds later. He picked us. I kept the wheel steady and my eyes on the mirror because that is what you do when surprise lands in the lane next to you. I thought I saw something long in his hand when we passed, like a stick or a bat. My wife didn't see it, which was fair. She didn't see him until we were already by. I told my wife I was going to phone 911. She nodded and looked back at the boys. I gave the operator the location as best I could. County Highway eastbound, just past the business park, before the long wetland run. I said a person had stepped into the road. She sounded bored at first and told me people cross there at night all the time. No one had been hit, so it did not sound like something they send a car for. I said I thought he had a stick or a bat, and her tone changed. She asked me to repeat the mile marker and said she would dispatch. We didn't realize our 3-year-old had caught the word person. We told him it was a deer because that's easier for a kid to picture. He said, "But I heard you say a person," and my wife quickly told him it was probably just a deer, that we wanted to make sure the police moved it so no one got hurt. He looked at me like he could see straight through the story. Then his expression softened. The car was dark, the road was steady beneath us, and the hum of the tires finally pulled him back toward sleep. Both kids were asleep by the time we reached the spot where I'd planned to turn around. For a second, I thought about just keeping on west. The car was quiet. The air felt calm for the first time all night, and it was like we were sitting in a little pocket of peace I didn't want to give up, but we stuck to the plan, took the exit, and looped onto the eastbound service road. After about a quarter mile, everything came to a stop. Traffic backed up from a wreck ahead. We could have just waited it out and taken the side streets home, but I told my wife I wanted to get back on the interstate instead. I said maybe if we passed that same stretch again and saw nothing, it would settle that feeling sitting in my chest. She agreed, and I think we both just needed to see for ourselves that the call hadn't turned into something worse. The eastbound stretch was empty at first. Then we hit the bend, and I saw the red and blue lights bleeding through the trees. The glow flickered over the trunks in that way that tells you what's waiting ahead before you actually see it. I slowed down without even thinking. My chest just tightened on its own. We were the first car they stopped. One cruiser was parked across the middle and slow lanes. Another angled near the fast lane. About 15 yards ahead, a shape lay under a blanket in the fast lane. The way the fabric curved and dipped told more than I wanted to know. A single shoe sat in the middle lane near the blanket, the other one farther down near the shoulder. Between them, bits of broken plastic caught the lights like dull little stars scattered across the asphalt. 2 cars were pulled over on the shoulder with their hazards flashing. The drivers stood by the guardrail with their hands on their heads. No shouting, no movement, just that still, hollow posture people have when the adrenaline's drained out and there's nothing left to do. An officer started walking toward us, and I heard movement from the back seat. Our 3-year-old sat up at exactly the wrong moment. He asked, "What's that?" And before I could even form an answer, an ambulance pulled in and stopped right between our hood and the blanket. It blocked his view completely. I remember silently thanking whatever small mercy handles details like that when the big things go wrong. The officer leaned down to my window, and I told him we were the ones who'd called earlier, 15 minutes before, about someone in the road. He nodded, said to stay put, and went to get our information. Cars started stacking up behind us. After a while, some drivers decided to do that thing people do when they've had enough of waiting. They turned the on-ramp into an off-ramp just to get away. We stayed, partly because the officer told us to, and partly because leaving would have felt like a different kind of wrong. It was 3 hours before they finally let us turn around on the closed highway and drive back the way we'd come. The first 15 minutes of that drive were me trying to convince my son that ambulances sometimes help hurt deer, and that's what this one was doing. He didn't believe me. He asked why there were shoes in the road if it was a deer. He fell asleep before I had to make up another answer. When we got home, the house felt different, quieter, but with a sort of hollow echo to it. We carried the kids to bed and sat in the living room without turning on a light. We talked quietly. We circled the same details over and over, saying them out loud so they'd stop shifting around in our heads. The next day, we told our parents and a few close friends what happened. It felt like the only way to deal with it without pretending it was small. We hugged a lot. We tried to go to bed early, but didn't sleep much. About a week later, a detective called. He wanted to go over our statement again. We told him everything, what we saw, where we were, what time it was. He asked if I was sure about the object I'd thought I saw in the person's hand. I told him I couldn't swear to it. He said that was okay. Then he told us the family wanted to thank us for calling when we did, for staying when the officers flagged us down, for helping them piece together their father's last moments. Then he said something that stuck with me. It didn't make complete sense to them, but they were grateful anyway. I didn't ask what didn't make sense. I already had enough that didn't. After that, we stayed off that road for a while. The kids still fought bedtime, but we switched to long walks, quiet cartoons, and pacing the living room until our arms ached. When we had to drive at night, we stuck to surface streets. Still, I kept thinking about that bend, the one where the trees flashed red and blue, the two shoes sitting far apart, the broken plastic scattered between them like someone had drawn a line through the night and dared you to follow it. I grew up in a small southern town, the kind where everyone knows everyone and not much ever changes. On the edge of town, there's this long 4-lane highway that nobody really uses. It looks brand new, even though it's been there for years, because no one drives on it. My dad told me they built it mostly for football season at the state university a couple hours away. Some alumni apparently wanted a direct route, so they could tailgate, drink all the way there, and avoid the main interstate. So most of the year, that highway just sits there, empty, surrounded by pine trees and farmland, stretching for miles with barely a light in sight. One night a few years ago, my girlfriend and I were driving that road heading back from a friend's place. It was one of those humid southern nights where the air feels thick and heavy, and the only light comes from your headlights. It must have been close to midnight, because I remember how quiet it was. Even the radio felt too loud, so we turned it down and just let the hum of the tires fill the silence. You can go miles on that road without seeing another pair of headlights. It's eerie in a way, like the world just ends beyond the reach of your high beams. We were in the middle of nowhere when I saw something. No, someone, standing dead center in the road. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me because the guy wasn't moving at all. I slammed the brakes and swerved just enough to miss him. The car lurched to the side and my girlfriend screamed. When we stopped, the guy was standing there in the rearview mirror, motionless, facing straight ahead. He didn't even flinch when we almost hit him. I thought, what the hell is this guy doing? I pulled up a few feet and turned on the hazards. There were no other cars, no houses, no lights. Just this guy, pale as a sheet, barefoot, wearing black clothes that looked too clean for someone walking on the side of the road. He wasn't even looking at us, just staring into the distance like he was watching something way beyond us. My first thought was that he was high or had wandered out of the woods. We get our share of meth heads around there, and people can look rough, but he didn't. He looked normal, maybe early 20s, clean-shaven, and short hair. But something about him felt wrong. Not dangerous exactly, just wrong. I rolled down the window a little and called out to him. That's when he moved. He kind of snapped his head toward us all at once, like someone had pressed play after pausing him. He walked up to the car slowly, and I swear his steps didn't match his movement, like he was gliding more than walking. I could see his face better now in the headlights. His eyes were wide, glassy, unfocused. He looked at me, but not really at me, like he was staring through me. He said he'd been in an accident. His voice was calm but shaky. He said his car had rolled off the road, that it was dark and he couldn't find it. I looked past him into the woods, but didn't see any sign of a wreck. No lights, no smoke, nothing. Just rows of pines on both sides, tight enough that a car couldn't have gone far without hitting a tree. I asked where his car was, and he kind of hesitated. He glanced toward the trees, but didn't answer. My girlfriend whispered that we should just call someone, but the guy didn't seem threatening, just confused. He kept rubbing his arms like he was cold, even though it was a warm night. I told him we could take him to a gas station a few miles up the road so he could call for help. But then he said something that made my stomach drop. He said, "Will you please invite me into your vehicle? Not can you give me a ride, not can I get in." He said, "Invite me." And he said it more than once. "Please invite me into your vehicle." Same tone, same words, over and over. At first, I thought maybe he was just in shock or something, repeating himself out of confusion. But the way he said it, it wasn't pleading, it was almost formal. Like there were rules to this situation I didn't understand. I started noticing other details then. His feet were bare, but they weren't dirty. His clothes weren't torn or dusty. If he'd really rolled a car or crawled out of the woods, there should have been something. Blood, scratches, a limp, anything. But he looked untouched. Perfectly fine, except for that distant, empty look. My girlfriend reached over and grabbed my arm. She whispered, "Don't let him in." She said it so quietly, I almost didn't hear her. I told the guy we didn't have phones and that we'd drive to the store down the road to get help. He just stood there and nodded slowly, still staring. I started driving and kept watching him in the rearview mirror. He didn't move. He just stood in the middle of the lane, watching the taillights fade, same way he was standing when we first saw him. We drove about 5 miles before we saw the gas station, and the whole time I kept checking the mirror, even though I knew he was long out of sight. My girlfriend finally broke the silence. She kind of laughed under her breath and said, "I think he might have been a vampire." Then a moment later, her tone shifted, and she said, "What if he wasn't lying? What if he was in an accident and he's hurt somewhere out there?" For a moment, I almost turned around, but something deep in my gut told me not to. We called the sheriff's office from the station phone. They said they'd send someone out. We waited there for maybe half an hour, but no patrol car ever came. Finally, I told the clerk what happened, and he looked at me like he'd heard it before. He said people had reported strange things on that stretch of road for years. We drove home eventually, trying to convince ourselves it was just some weird coincidence. But the next morning, curiosity got the best of me. I drove back out there during daylight, retraced our route, and looked for any sign of a wreck. There was nothing. Not a broken branch, not a tire mark, not even a piece of glass. The asphalt looked untouched. Later that week, I checked the local paper, an online police blotter. No accident reports, no missing persons, nothing. I don't know who that guy was or what we saw that night. Maybe he was real, maybe not, but I can still see his face when I think about it. How calm he looked, how he kept repeating those same words. "Please invite me into your vehicle." Sometimes when I drive that way at night, I still catch myself glancing at the shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing there, barefoot, waiting. If you're out there, vampire man, wear shoes next time. You'd be a lot more believable. About 2 years ago, I drove home late from a family reunion. It was a 2-hour drive, and I didn't stay over because I had work the next morning. The route had no towns, just a narrow 2-lane road with heavy brush and tall trees pressed right up to the edge. It had no streetlights, no houses, and every now and then I'd see a mailbox with no driveway. Most of the time, it was only my headlights and whatever showed up in the beams at the last second. Road signs, reflective posts, pale tree trunks. 45 minutes in, I hit a wall. 1 second I felt fine. The next, I could barely keep my eyes open. It wasn't normal fatigue. It felt like my body just shut down. I rolled the window down and let cold air slap me and blasted the radio, but nothing helped. I knew I shouldn't keep going, but there wasn't anywhere safe to stop. No gas station, no rest areas, just dark woods. I started looking for a spot where I wouldn't be right on the road. Eventually, I saw a break in the brush and pulled off. The tires bumped over soft grass, and I nosed the car behind some bushes, not hidden, but less obvious from the road. I turned the hazards on for a second, then switched them off. I didn't want to draw attention. I locked the doors, checked the time, 11:22, and leaned the seat back. I told myself I'd only nap for 10 minutes. I woke up to a faint scratching sound. The clock said 11:50. The sound stopped after a few seconds. I was so tired that I convinced myself it was branches or maybe an animal brushing past. I didn't even look, I just went back to sleep. The next time I woke, it was the same sound. A steady dragging across the door, then along the rear panel. It would pause and start again. The clock said 12:40. That's when it hit me. This wasn't random. Something had come back after almost an hour. I tried to tell myself it was an animal, but the timing didn't make sense. I lifted my head and looked into the rearview mirror. At first, I only saw the faint outline of trees in the dark. Then I caught movement, something slipping back into the woods. I didn't see a clear shape, just a shadow moving low and quick. My stomach dropped. I started the car right away, shifted into drive and pulled out. I didn't floor it, but I picked up speed as I went. Less than 100 yards up there was a bend. As I rounded it, my headlights lit up another car pulled over on the shoulder. The driver's door was hanging open. No hazards, no dome light, no movement. It looked empty, but fresh. I slowed just enough to glance in. I didn't see anyone inside. I drove past and checked my mirror. At first, the road was empty. Then a man suddenly sprinted into the lane from beyond the bend. He was running full speed straight toward me. I cracked the window a little and heard him shouting for me to get out of the car. He wasn't asking for help. He was ordering me like he had authority. The tone was sharp, aggressive. I hit the gas and left him behind. I didn't stop again. I watched the mirrors for a long time. I only relaxed when the trees pulled back and there were actual lights. I merged onto a bigger road and only then noticed my hands shaking on the wheel. When I got home, I parked under the light in front of my building and walked around the car. On the rear door and quarter panel, there were 3 thin lines, not deep gouges, more like something rough had scraped the paint. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I checked again in daylight. The marks were there, each one about the length of my forearm. The spacing looked deliberate, not random. I kept thinking about the timing, 11:50, then 12:40. If the first sound was random, the second felt planned. For the next week, I kept replaying the drive in my head. The open door, the hidden movement near my car, the man sprinting out after I passed. It fit together too well. One person waits by the staged car. Another creeps up on me, scratches to see if I move, then slips away. When I pull back onto the road, I pass the setup. The man runs out screaming to make me stop. If I had pulled over for the open car, I would have been boxed in, maybe robbed, maybe worse. I didn't report it. What would I say? A guy told me to get out of my car? The cops would ask why I was parked on the grass in the middle of the night. They'd tell me not to sleep on rural roads, and they'd be right. I regret pulling over, but I also think about how close I came to stepping out when I saw that open door. If I had, I probably wouldn't have made it to the highway. Since then, I don't nap on the road. If I'm tired, I push to a gas station with lights and people around. I keep pepper spray in the car now, and I trust that gut feeling I had. That wasn't nerves. It was my brain warning me something was wrong. People like to think horror lives in empty places. Sometimes it's just in the setup. An open car door, a scratch on the paint. That night wasn't a ghost story. It was someone with a plan for whoever stopped. I almost played into it. I'm glad I didn't. If you ever feel yourself fading on a dark road, don't pull into the bushes. Keep driving until you find light. And if someone runs out of the dark yelling for you to get out, don't stop. Just keep driving. My wife and I were in the middle of moving between cities. We had spent the entire day loading a 16-foot trailer with everything we owned. By the time we got the last box inside, the sun was gone and the sky was fading to dark. I had borrowed a big pickup truck to pull the trailer, and with how much we had packed, the rig was incredibly heavy. The truck was sluggish when it started moving, slow to climb speed, and it took forever to stop. I knew driving at night with that much weight was going to be rough, but we didn't have another choice. We headed out across the state, and by midnight we were deep into a desolate stretch of highway. It was 2 lanes wide, flat and empty, and we hadn't seen another car in what felt like an hour. My wife had fallen asleep on the bench seat beside me, curled up with her head against the door while I kept my focus on the road. The truck rumbled steady at 60, maybe 65, and the only light came from the headlights pushing forward into the black. Then I spotted movement in the distance. 2 shapes stepped into the road, maybe 200 yards ahead. At first I thought they were deer. That's normal for the area, so I eased off the gas, tapped the brakes, and laid on the horn. Usually that's enough to send deer running. I wasn't panicking, not yet, but as the headlights reached them, I realized they weren't deer at all. They were men. 2 grown men standing directly in the road. One stood in my lane, the other stood in the opposite lane. They had positioned themselves so I couldn't go left or right. They were trying to stop us. Instantly I knew this was bad. With the weight of the trailer, there was no way I could bring the truck to a full stop in time. The rig was simply too heavy, and I was already closing in fast. They must not have understood how impossible it was for me to stop before reaching them. I slammed on the brake pedal anyway, the truck shuddering and tires screaming against the asphalt. The trailer fishtailed and tugged hard at the back, threatening to jackknife. I blasted the horn again and again, hoping to scare them into moving. But neither of them budged. They just stood there, staring me down as I came closer, still rolling at 35, maybe 40 miles an hour. At that point, I realized I had one option. I centered the truck in the middle of the 2 lanes, aiming dead between them, praying neither one decided to close that gap. I gripped the wheel and braced myself. At the very last second, the man in my lane jumped aside. He was so close I thought for sure the side mirror would catch his head. I missed him by inches. Then we were past them. It was over in seconds. From the time I realized they weren't deer to the moment I cleared them, maybe 5 to 8 seconds had passed. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I kept expecting to see headlights in the rear view, maybe a car they had hidden, but the highway was empty. No vehicles, no sign of a breakdown. Just 2 men in the middle of nowhere at midnight, trying to force us to stop. Based on how they acted, I have no doubt they were planning something. Robbery, hijacking, who knows? But it wasn't good. I didn't pull over. I kept my foot steady and forced myself not to look back again. My chest felt like it was going to burst. I was shaking and struggling to breathe, and for a moment all I could think about was how close I had come to killing one of them, or how close they had come to stopping us. It wasn't until a minute later that I noticed my wife wasn't sitting beside me anymore. When I had hit the brakes that hard, she'd been thrown off the seat and onto the floor. This was before seatbelts were required, so she had nothing holding her in place. She groggily pushed herself back up, rubbing her head, and asked me what had happened. She had missed the entire ordeal. I just shook my head and told her to go back to sleep. I didn't want to explain, not while my hands were still trembling on the wheel. The rest of the drive, I couldn't shake the image of those 2 men, standing perfectly still, blocking both lanes, waiting for us to reach them. There was no car, no broken down vehicle, no reason for them to be there at midnight in the middle of nowhere. They weren't stranded. They weren't looking for help. They were trying to make us stop. I kept driving until I saw the glow of another town on the horizon, and only then did I let myself breathe easier. But that night has stayed with me ever since. I don't know what their plan was, and I'm glad I never found out. All I know is if I'd managed to stop that truck, things could have ended very differently. It was late at night, sometime around 1 in the morning, and my buddy and I were parked outside a little 24-hour pizza place. We weren't driving around, just sitting in my car, waiting for the order to be ready. The lot was mostly empty except for a couple of cars on the far side. The glow from the shop's neon sign lit up the front row, but where we were parked, the light didn't quite reach. I remember we were just talking, killing time. I think I was rambling about some movie we'd watched earlier, giving a half-baked hot take trying to make him laugh. My buddy wasn't really responding. At first I figured he was just tired, zoning out while I kept going. Then I noticed he was staring at me. That might not sound strange, but this guy never looked people in the eye. He was one of those guys who would glance at you for half a second and then look away again. Eye contact made him uncomfortable. So when I saw him locked on me eyes wide, it was immediately off. I stopped mid-sentence and asked, "Dude, what's up?" He didn't say anything. He just raised his hand and pointed past me, toward my window. Right outside my window, not even a foot away, was a man. I hadn't heard him approach. He was bent forward, his face inches from the glass, lunging toward it like he'd just stopped himself at the very last second before smashing into it. His eyes were wide, his mouth slightly twisted open, like he'd been caught in the middle of something. For half a second, he didn't move. He just held that position, face almost pressed to the glass, and stared right at me. Then he straightened up and stumbled back a few steps. He turned without a word and jogged off across the lot, disappearing into the shadows near the street. I turned back to my friend, heart pounding, and asked, "What the hell was that?" He finally blinked, still pale, and explained why he'd frozen. Apparently the man had first walked by glancing in at us. Then he stopped, backed up a few steps, and suddenly started sprinting straight at the car. My buddy saw him sprinting toward us, but by the time he could react, the guy was already right there. He had been a split second away from slamming full force into the side of the car. The only thing that stopped him was me turning my head at the exact moment my friend pointed. It was like being caught ruined whatever he was about to do, and he pulled up short, stopping half an inch from my window. I sat there trying to piece it together, but the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. If he was just some drunk or someone messing with us, why sprint at a parked car in the middle of the night? And why stop so suddenly the second we both looked at him? The pizza place was only a few yards away. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting him to circle back or come at us again. Every shadow outside the glow of the neon looked like it could be him waiting. My buddy was rattled too. He didn't even want to get out of the car when our order was ready. We debated just leaving it, but hunger won. When we finally went inside, we made sure to stick close together, scanning the lot the whole time. The guy was nowhere in sight. On the drive back, the mood was completely different. Neither of us talked much. Every time headlights appeared behind us, I checked the mirror to make sure it wasn't him following. I even circled the block once before pulling up at my friend's place, just in case. To this day, I won't sit in a parked car late at night without checking my mirrors every few seconds. And every time I pass a 24-hour pizza place, I remember that empty parking lot and the man who came running out of the dark for no reason.